Hey there, welcome to bedtime. True alone at home horror stories with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep with these tales. And prepare yourself for in 180 minutes. Send shivers down your spine, hit like, share with friends, and join our crew. Subscribing, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below us, up and prepare. There comes a moment in every young man's life when he has to stare from the knife in his hand to the boner in his pants and question whether free will can truly exist in a world where an honors student can find himself in this situation and not run away screaming. I think we might have made some bad decisions, Penny, I confessed as she stared at me in desperation. She wrapped her arms tightly around her ribs and pushed away the first tears. You think? She demanded, her voice shaking. He's 19, and 13 months ago, it felt like dash. She rubbed her palms against her eyes. Do you doubt, even for a second, that I wake up every single day wondering what the hell I was thinking when I decided to date him? Her tears flowed faster than she could wipe them away. I'm so stupid. I couldn't figure out where to put my hands, feet, eyes, or self, so I just sort of shuffled awkwardly in place. I tried to hand the knife back to her, but felt a white-hot pain in my arm when I lifted it, so I pulled it back in shock, figuring the weapon would curse me if I released it early. I tried to mask the sudden hurt. No, I understand. It makes perfect sense. She wiped her nose and stared at me. Dating Brent makes perfect sense? I nodded. No. Well, see, that's what I mean. Sometimes a person can, just, I don't know, affect you so deeply that even if you know what you're doing is wrong, or stupid, or dangerous, it just makes sense. Because if you give up the thing that makes the concept of reason seem unimportant, what are you really saving? The only certainty is that we're going to die one day, so there's no sense in letting go of something that makes living worthwhile. Penny allowed half a grin, but didn't stop crying. Is that a monologue from some stupid 80s teen movie? Ha! I grunted. No, I just kind of said what I was thinking. See, that's exactly my point. We can be reasonable people who knowingly say and do stupid shit when staring at that one person who can make us forget how the words go. Penny looked down and nodded sadly, her raven hair shimmering in the afternoon light. James, I am so sorry. Her shoulders slumped. I know I'm that person for you. That was probably the most awkward moment of my life. I remember Jimmy Fisher pissing his pants in the 4th grade and turning redder than I had thought physiologically possible. By the way my face was burning, though, I was pretty sure that I'd surpassed Fisher red. I was so careful. How did you find out? Penny shrugged. I have my ways. To clarify, you remember that you stabbed Brent twice with a supernatural blade, right? Oh, right, I answered. So, like, which stuff? She rubbed her arms. Something like that. I needed someone who would do whatever I said without question, so that was what made me special to her. Penny had looked me up in a crystal ball or some equivalent fuckery and found a person whom she could use however she needed. I felt like shit. To her credit, though, she was exactly right about my willingness. So, how does this thing work? I can stab Brent by putting it in you? My stomach lurched at my own unexpected phrasing. She allowed a deep sigh. That knife will transfer most of the damage to the other party when a strong romantic connection exists. Stabbing me will hurt Brent far worse. She flashed a fake smile. So there you have it. I can't separate feelings of intense attraction and complete terror from the ex-boyfriend whose next beating might be my last. She threw her arms up into the air. I guess that's it, James, isn't it? You idolize someone until finding out she's completely fucking insane. I shuffled some more. No, you just sound completely fucking human. Brent's an idiot. I don't like you any less. My breath stopped. Slowly, I looked down at my arm, heart racing. I poked it, and the white-hot pain immediately returned. Ow! Penny screeched from 3 feet away. Oh, shit, I breathed. Okay, Penny, I think I know what we're going to do about Brent, but you're not gonna like it. I was crouching in the bushes outside a house I'd never seen before, clutching a deadly weapon while peeking through the windows, when I again reflected on the ridiculous things we do when the right person makes us think it's a good idea at the time. Pausing made me reflect on my decisions, which was a terrible idea, so I pushed open the window and crawled inside. Most people don't lock their first-floor windows, and they never stop to consider that fact or double-check unless something terrible happens. I told myself that I wasn't going to do this, that I couldn't intimidate a guy twice my size who had already dragged my name into a serious felony. Denial was the only way I was able to convince myself to walk through his living room and into the kitchen with no idea of what I would find. Of course I found Brent there, because it was his house and I was looking for him. Solid fear hit me all at once, igniting every nerve in my body as I finally accepted the reality of what I was doing. He stared at me with all the fascination of a newborn discovering his fingers for the very first time. The fuck, you shit? I stammered, is that a question? Who are you, and why did you bring a fucking knife to my house? Oh, I looked down at the blade. Stay away from Penny. Forever. No. I balked. Okay, then. Stop hitting her. No. She's my girl and I can do whatever I want to her. I wrinkled my brow. She stops being your girl if she wants to break up with you. He looked very confused. No, she doesn't. I, too, felt confused. I'd never had an argument like this before. Well, never mind, it's too complicated. You're not allowed to hit someone if they don't want you to hit them, okay? Yes, I am. I've done it before. My jaw hung slack. I gazed him up and down, noticing bandages on his arm and thigh. Okay, I explained slowly, you can't do it because I have a knife. He looked at me like I'd pulled Excalibur from my own rectum as dawning realization came over his face. James? Comprehension gave way to fury. He screamed and took an intimidating step toward me. I instinctively held up the knife. He paused, looked over at the kitchen counter, then grabbed a chef's knife from a chopping block. Then Brent charged at me. I really hoped I was right about the next part of my plan, because I liked not being dead. Sorry, Penny, I whispered, driving the blade into my thigh. Wowza, did that hurt. Brent screamed and grabbed the same part of his own thigh. Then he collapsed to the floor and was quiet. I pulled my blade out, yelping in agony as I did so. Hopping back once, I examined my injury. There was almost no blood. Then I looked back at Brent, now holding my knife aloft, ready for the next attack. But it didn't come. In fact, Brent wasn't moving at all. Hands shaking, I moved around his body, keeping as much space between him and me that the kitchen would allow. He still didn't move. Then, as I drew even with his side, I saw it. He had landed on the chef's knife, which had slid between his ribs. The entire blade had disappeared into his chest, which was now pooling blood beneath him. That solid fear now cranked past what I thought a human could experience. My mind spun. I reached for my cell phone to call 911. Then I realized what was about to happen. If he survived, he would just keep coming after Penny. I'd seen in his face that he would never, ever stop. If he died, and I called it in as the sole survivor and witness, claiming that I'd only broken into his house to intimidate, but not kill, with my knife, it's possible that the jury would think I was full of shit. The fact that he had already led the cops to my house didn't make things any better. And if he was going to die anyway, what point was there in calling an ambulance? "Sorry, Brent," I whispered. "If you're going to dig your own grave, make sure you're not standing over a septic tank." The police did interview me, but I just repeated the fact that I didn't know Brent. They had no proof against me, so his death got filed away as an accident. Everyone in town pretended that he was this amazing guy instead of a complete turd, which is what you're supposed to do when a turd dies, and we all moved on with our lives. "That's it?" Connor asked. "And you expect us to believe your story about magical knives?" Julia added. I leaned back in the chair and looked back and forth between my two children. "You'll both be starting high school next year, and your friends are going to start dating. The whole point of my story is that the romantic aspect is far more intense than the magical part of it." "Dad," Julia sighed, "half of our class has already started dating. We know how dramatic it is. And are you really going to just brush past the part where you killed someone?" "He didn't kill Brent. Don't you remember learning about natural selection?" Connor turned from his sister to face me. "So what you're telling us is that we shouldn't date anyone at all, because they're not going to like us back and it's going to suck?" "Well," I shrugged, "the sucking part is just something you're going to have to go through." "Even though we're going to be rejected," he clarified. "Yes." Connor stared pensively at the ceiling. "Is it really worth it?" I shrugged. "That doesn't matter. You're going to chase the feeling, no matter how much it hurts. I'm just trying to get you ready for it." "This was a really weird talk, Dad," Julia explained. "I knew it would be. But I did it anyway." They stared at me in exasperation. "And I'd do it all again," I explained as Penny walked into the room, her raven hair falling perfectly around her face. She moved behind me and draped her arms around my neck. "Sophie says her parents are weird, but she's wrong," Julia explained to her brother. "Her parents are hippies. Ours are just weird." Connor looked from her to Penny and me. "So is that it? Can we go now?" "Sure," I answered, kissing Penny's hand and gently rubbing the scar on her thigh. Sometimes, you don't know when a story's going to end until you get there. I sat next to the weird kid on the first day of middle school. During first period, as the teacher droned on about timetables, he incrementally shifted his chair towards me and whispered in my ear, "There's a murderer in this town. Did you know that?" My family had just moved to the town from a different state, and had less than a week to settle in before school began. I was a small, timid 12-year-old girl with big glasses, joining as a new student in the 7th grade. The type that wouldn't talk unless I was spoken to, and do exactly what I was told. The gullible type to naively take everything at face value. I never had many friends, and I figured my prospects weren't great at this new school either. All the kids had a year to know each other already, and friendship groups seemed pretty much formed. Still, I was observant to their interactions, enough to realize this kid was most definitely the outcast. Too anxious to look at him, I stared wide-eyed towards the front and shook my head slowly. "It's true," he continued. He's got long, sharp crooked teeth and smells of pea and rotten fish. One of his eyes is missing, he's just got an empty socket there. Ironically, pea and rotten fish was exactly what this kid smelled like. I tried not to breathe in as he leaned in even closer. He's sensing my fear, I thought, as I tried to stay as still as possible. Nobody else seemed to notice us at the back of the class next to the window. If he catches you alone, he'll grab you and take you somewhere no one will find you. He'll shove things in your butthole from where you poop. He made a scratching sound with the end of his ruler on my desk, crrkck. I crossed my legs tightly as I cringed in my seat. And laugh when you scream. When he's had his fun, he'll cut you up and dump you in Stanville Creek. If you don't believe me, I can show you later. You can see bones in there if you look closely. Stanville Creek was a pond in a wooded area of town. On the way to school and back from my house, there was a sign pointing to a trail that disappeared into the depths of the woods. It read S.Ville Creek 1.5 miles, indicating that it was a 1.5-mile walk away into that dark abyss. I later found out that it wasn't really a creek per se, just a large stagnant body of water inhabited by a lot of wildlife. The misnomer originated from its previous branching into the town's main river, but industrial works had somehow isolated it. He poked my face with the sharp end of the pencil, and I accidentally let out a loud yelp. "Stop messing around at the back," shouted the teacher. Everyone turned to look at us, and my face flushed red. The weird kid moved his seat back, grinning at me from ear to ear. I glanced at him for the first time. He was pale and lanky, with long, greasy black hair that almost covered his eyes and ran in strips down to his shoulders at the back. A snot booger hung from his left nostril. He had dark eyebrows and wore a green sweatshirt that was too big for him, with untied laces trailing from his dirt-covered black and white sneakers. For the rest of the day, he would periodically stick his tongue out at me and make scratching noises with a pencil on his desk. At lunch, he sat alone on a bench and kept staring at me. When it came time to go home, he was waiting to torment me again at the school gate. "The murderer's gonna get you," he mumbled as I walked past. "He likes little girls just like you. You're not gonna make it home today." Terror engulfed me and my knees went weak. I backtraced my steps to the school gate and stared at him with bulging eyes. "Scaredy cat," he mumbled, and started walking away. Instinctively, I followed him. The killer can't take me if I'm not alone, I thought. He turned around. "Stop following me," he growled. He kept walking, I kept following him, and he turned around again. A wicked idea popped into his mind, and he flashed a grin. "Want to hear a story?" I looked at him blankly, which he evidently took as a yes. He continued walking. I noticed he had a slight limp as I followed behind him. About 50 years ago, there was a really nice teacher working at our school called Mrs. Derry. She actually taught in our class. Anyway, she married one of the other teachers and they had 3 kids who went to the school. One day, they got divorced and he got the kids. They all told her she had to leave the school on the last day of that year. When the next year started, she wasn't there. He paused for dramatic effect. "Guess where she went?" A different school?" I said quietly. "Nope." "A new job?" "Nope." "A different country?" Wrong again. On the first day, a girl noticed a bad smell coming from the storage room outside the lunch hall. You know, the one with the door painted red. She opened the door to have a look. He paused again dramatically, as I remembered walking past that same red door earlier. and she saw Mrs. Derry's dead, rotting corpse hanging from her neck off the ceiling. He grinned as my eyes widened, gleeful as he watched the psychological damage he had inflicted with a single sentence. I was walking shakily on autopilot, still trailing behind him. I inched closer to him as we walked past the S.Phil Creek sign. It was only a 15-minute walk back to my place. If my house hadn't been on the way to his, I probably would have ended up following him home. I'm gonna go now, I trembled, as we walked past my house. He ignored me and just kept walking away. I looked around like a deer and sprinted up the front steps, where my mom let me in. "Hey, sweetie, how was your first day?" "Good," I said, still trembling. I walked briskly past her and up the stairs to my room, curling up in a ball on the floor. All I could think about that night was what I would find if I opened that red door outside the lunch hall, and how someone could die by being hanged from their neck. The next day, I sat beside the weird kid again, whose name was Will. He kept making faces at me every time I looked in his direction. Thankfully, we had different classes later in the morning. But even when he wasn't there, it was as if he had infested my mind. I still couldn't concentrate, and kept thinking about the serial killer and the teacher he told me about yesterday. At lunch, I walked past the dreaded storage room, and stood outside the red door for a moment. I heard Will's voice behind me. "I dare you to open it," he grinned. "Hey, I'll give you a $5 if you open it." I reached for the handle, being in my nature to do as I was told. He came closer. In that moment, we were alone in the corridor. I turned the handle and pulled the door open just wide enough. Suddenly, I felt a strong push behind me. I stumbled into the storage room, and the door slammed behind me as footsteps darted away. It was pitch black in there. A foul, sweaty odor marinated in the warm humidity. I gagged and banged on the door as I fumbled around for the handle, but couldn't open the door no matter how hard I tried. It slowly dawned on me that I was locked inside a room where someone had hanged themselves. I looked into the darkness. Then I heard the sound of something swinging, looked up and thought I saw a mangled, decomposed face looking down at me with a noose around its neck. I began screaming. "Help! Help! Help me!" I shrieked. I banged on the inside of the door as hard as I could, but no one came to save me. I kept shrieking for a good 10 minutes, banging with my hands and elbows like my life depended on it, which I thought it did. Finally, it opened. I fell into the cleaning lady's arms, pale and hyperventilating. My knuckles were beaten raw. "My goodness, how did you get in there?" "I got stuck," I said, dazed. "You poor thing." She patted my head and laughed. Will greeted me again at the school gates, a sick grin plastered on his face. I wanted to avoid him, but at the same time, I was now deathly afraid of walking home alone. "That was hilarious," he laughed. "Did you even hear yourself? You sounded like a dying monkey. Or a dolphin, or something." I grimaced as we started walking. "So, did you see a dead body in there?" he taunted. I nodded. "Really? Well, you better hope it's not hiding under your bed tonight." He smirked. I remained silent as ever. We walked for a minute, then he suddenly stopped and pointed at a window of the hospital close to the school. "There's an old woman living in that room, right there," he said. "She's lying down so you can't see her, but sometimes she'll sit up and stare at you out the window, with 100 tubes coming out of her and all." He motioned with his hands as I looked away quickly. "Then," he continued, "when the sun sets, she sometimes climbs out of the window and finds people walking alone on the street." Kids, adults, old people, anyone. Then she claws out their necks with her nails and sucks their blood until they're dry. My middle school days pretty much continued like this. I was traumatized for a while after the storage room incident, but I was afraid that we'll do something worse if I tried to avoid him. Or that a serial killer would get me if I walked alone, ironically, an idea he had planted in my mind. So I was stuck with him. He waited for me at the end of every school day by the gate, and would have a new horrifying and totally age-inappropriate story to terrorize me with, based on random places we passed in the town. His stories progressively got wilder and more creative. You see this bridge? There was a problem with it just a few years ago. They didn't build it quite right. A pregnant woman was walking on it one day, and it snapped. She fell into the river and drowned with her baby. Some kids went into that field for a camping trip and they never came back. Turns out, one of them got bitten by a wolf with rabies, and he started biting the others. They all died slowly and painfully, knowing they were dying but couldn't do anything about it. 'Cause rabies makes you go mad. He's sometimes sprinkled in the odd horrific fact. If you cut someone's head off, they can still blink for 5 minutes. About 1 million kids get kidnapped every year. Did you know that? He always made it a point to meet me at the school gate every day, and over time it became our ritual. He was sick one day and didn't attend school, but he made it to the gate at the usual school finishing time with a fever and sore throat, and walked straight back with me, informing me that some teachers in our school were spying on me at night or something. There was no way he'd miss a single opportunity to torment me, probably the highlight of his otherwise solitary day. I can't pinpoint exactly when my fear subsided and gave way to intrigue and entertainment. As I learned more about the world and realized not everything you hear is necessarily true, I began exploring the town, sometimes with my parents, and even with a new friend from the same math class on the weekends. Yes, I somehow made a friend, and we bonded over the fact that we both wore glasses. My dad took me to visit the hospital when he had a checkup. I discovered the room with the old lady was just an admin office. My friend and I went to the field where the campers went missing, apparently. There were no dead bodies foaming at the mouth, and no rabid wolves. One day, I even opened a red storage room door again. I was obviously seeing things in my panic when I had been locked in there, nothing but a bunch of tools and cleaning supplies, with a conveniently placed mop that could have been mistaken for a head in the dark. Moving from 7th to 8th grade, I was surprised to find myself looking forward to our walks back home. Well, caught onto my newfound skepticism and figured the standard horror stories wouldn't cut it anymore. He changed tact quickly. Look, that's Ben's house. You know Ben in our class? You know why he's so fat? His mom's a butcher, and sometimes she puts kids' meat in his pies and makes sausages out of them for dinner. A kid in the year below disappeared last year. I think he ate him. So yeah, anyway, that's why you shouldn't talk to him anymore. He had really turned into a comedian. We became somewhat friends. We even started having normal conversations periodically, stuff about schoolwork and other kids in the class. He stopped abruptly one day, when we walked past the S.Ville Creek sign. You ever been down there? No, I replied. Of all the places in town, Stanville Creek was the only one I couldn't bring myself to visit in our small, relatively safe town that I had begun settling into. I never suggested going there to anyone, but I would think about what was down there often. At this point, I doubted there was actually a serial killer dumping bodies in there, but I just felt uneasy about it. Perhaps it was because that was my first introduction to the town, so I was still subconsciously afraid and couldn't control that. I couldn't put my finger on it. Come on, let's go then. I don't know, I said. What, you scared? He sneered. Come on, don't tell me you actually think there's dead people there. I shrugged. You can hold my hand? He held his hand out, but I shook my head. Fine, whatever. I was surprised he didn't drag me down there. We kept walking, silent for a while before we got close to my house. You know all the shit I told you last year was fake, right? He paused. You do know that, right? I figured, I replied. Just checking. He walked off without a goodbye, but I was used to that now. I watched him head off onto the next road, the ever-present limp in his stride. On the last day of 8th grade, school ended early. I had last period with Will that day, and was expecting to leave with him as usual. They've built this new lounge place on the 2nd floor. I'm gonna check it out, he said, and bolted into the hallway then up the stairs without warning. I naturally went up too. They had some bean bags, soccer balls, a PlayStation, and DVDs. Wanna watch a scary movie? He grinned. No. Cool. He immediately picked up Friday the 13th and slotted it into the DVD player. I sat on one of the bean bags at the opposite end of the room. So, we're going to different high schools, I guess. Who you gonna follow around when I'm gone? I'll just have to find someone else, I shrugged. He looked disappointed for a second, but the expression faded quickly. Fair enough. Colored lines and pixels flashed across the grainy screen. This piece of shit's broken, he complained, as the screen went neon blue. Silence reigned. He turned to look at me, illuminated by the blue glow. I realized he looked different to when I first saw him. He was taller. His hair was cut shorter, and he wasn't as scrawny. Even the snot that faithfully hung from his nostril before was gone now. Perhaps the changes had been so incremental that I'd barely noticed, after seeing him every day for the majority of 2 years. Why don't you stink of piss anymore? I asked. I know, what a question. For some reason, it felt right to say in the moment. I discovered what a shower was. Thanks for noticing. He mumbled. You're welcome. Why didn't you tell anyone I locked you in the storage room? His question caught me off guard. I took a second to think, and came to the conclusion I was afraid of what he might do to me at the time, if he found out I told someone. I don't know. He just looked down. I get that. Well, good thing you didn't. Good for you. I rolled my eyes. If you tell anyone about it, I'll have to shut you back inside. It's fine, I shrugged. There's no dead lady in there. You didn't sound fine. He scoffed. Shut up. I'm leaving. I got up, and this time he followed me down the stairs and out of the empty school halls. I know the stuff you told me last year, you know, about the teacher and stuff, was all fake, I began, but how did you come up with those stories? I mean, some of that stuff really scared me. That's 'cause I was trying to, he snorted, but not all of it is completely fake. I came up with pretty much all of them from something I saw, but wasn't nearly as interesting. I have trouble falling asleep most nights. I just lie in bed and come up with stories and stuff in my head to help me sleep. How do they help you sleep? I asked. Wouldn't they keep you awake? Nah, that's if you actually find them scary. I don't. They're just fun to think about, and before I know it, I've drifted off. The teacher who hanged herself story, he continued. Well, actually there was a nice teacher who taught our class in 6th grade before you came, and she actually was called Mrs. Derry. And she actually was married to another teacher at school. She was the only one who really talked to me. So when she divorced him and left out of nowhere, I felt kind of angry. Maybe making up a story about her killing herself was a bit too far, but I didn't want to think she'd left me here alone. And the one about the old woman in the hospital? That was based off my grandma. She actually died of cancer. She went mad before she died, and it freaked me out. Lost her mind. I thought the only thing scarier than her was if she started climbing out the windows like Spider-Man and became a vampire. The pregnant woman that fell off the bridge? That. He paused. That was based off my mom. She got pregnant and just left one day. That was 5 years ago now. I think she cheated on my stepdad. Haven't heard from her since. I don't know if she died or whatever, but I think it would be better if she did. I mean, I didn't want to think she left me on purpose. I hoped she had an accident or something instead, like something she couldn't control that forced her to leave, instead of actually wanting to do it, you know? His voice sounded strained. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Whatever, he said nonchalantly, it's in the past. You don't need to feel bad for me or anything. I continued to listen as he debunked the rest of the stories he had told me. The campers that died of rabies story was inspired by some kids he didn't like who went on a field trip. The story about the teachers spying on students that had happened once in another school. The teacher was just a pervert and got fired. It wasn't the elaborate surveillance scheme he made it out to be. The one about Ben was because he was a big kid that bullied him for a while. So that's where that all came from, I said. So now you know. What about the one about the murderer at Stanville Creek? What's that based off of? He looked surprised, hesitating for a second as if he'd forgotten the explanation. Actually, that was the only one I made up from scratch. I just wanted to make up the most horrifying thing I could imagine to scare you with it, he laughed. You really think the adults would let you walk home alone if there was an actual serial killer in town? Guess not, I said. We stopped, as I had reached my house, and it dawned on me that this was our last walk back home. Will, I said, with a firm tone. He looked at me. You've got to come to my 14th birthday party at my house. It's on Saturday. I told you this last year, he sighed, sounding frustrated. I can't. Why not? I just can't. This might be the last time I see you for a while. Can't you try or something? I pleaded. He glanced down, then to the side for a moment, and finally back at me. Fine, he said. I'll be there. He flashed a rare smile. Okay. I ran inside excitedly as he turned and continued onwards. My parents were eager for me to have my first proper birthday party. I'd gone to places with them before to celebrate, but never really had a one with friends. They were probably worried I had no friends at all. There were only 4 people invited to the party, but I was really just excited to see Will outside of school for once. I was certain he would show up. But he never did. I waited anxiously the whole day, and when my friends left, disappointment overwhelmed me. Ah, sweetie. Did you tell him it was today? Asked Mom. Don't take it personally, said Dad. As night came, the disappointment slowly grew into concern. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something bad had happened. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he decided not to come. Most likely one of the two. But I had known Will for 2 years. Despite his abrasive, cold attitude, I realized that he never failed to show up at the school gate, not even once, to walk me home. The conviction in his tone when he agreed to come to the party made me absolutely sure he would be there. Something wasn't right. I woke up at 2 a.m. in a cold sweat. I had to go to Stanville Creek. I didn't know why, or what I was looking for. I just an undeniable gut feeling that I would find answers there. The impulse was too strong to be ignored, and it took over me completely. I tiptoed past my parents, sound asleep in their room. I didn't bother to wake them. They would make me wait until daylight, and in that moment, there was no waiting. I put on my coat and grabbed a flashlight, then slipped out of the house into the dark street, blasting into a sprint. I felt my pulse bound in my temples as I ran as fast as I possibly could. For the first time, I traversed a sign that said S.Ville Creek 1.5 miles and descended into the depths of the woods without fear or hesitation. What am I thinking? I thought, in my confused, panicked sprint. Why am I running out here, alone at night? Why am I so sure I'll find something here? I couldn't answer those questions. All I could do was keep running down the trail. I finally arrived at Stanville Creek. I aimed my flashlight at the circular pond, with a diameter around 30 yards, thin forest surrounding the area. Lily pads floated on the surface, green algae strewn across the stagnant water. The moon and stars reflected faintly. It was quiet and serene, apart from the sound of my own breath and crickets. Nothing sinister, no bodies or blood in the water. Just sleeping nature. Not much to see after all. Not sure why I even came here, I thought, but it was kind of worth it. At the very least, I just felt relieved and partly accomplished that I had literally confronted my biggest fear to date. I walked a little around the perimeter on the grass, and stood still for a second to appreciate the feeling of being alone there. Hopefully Mom and Dad are still asleep so they don't tell me off for sneaking out, I thought, as I turned to leave. My urge had been satisfied. I whipped my flashlight around, but aimed it back at something that suddenly caught my attention. Something black and angular next to the base of a tree that looked out of place in the distance. I walked towards it, and as I approached, recognized that it was a large black suitcase. Figuring someone had dumped it as trash, I looked at it for a while before I pinched the zipper and tugged on it, unzipping it halfway out of curiosity. Something slipped out, and it took me a second to register that it was a human hand. I don't remember much of what happened immediately after that. It's still a hazy blur, even after my parents put me through 2 months of therapy. According to them, I burst in through the front door screaming at them to call the police, that there was a body in the suitcase. The remains were promptly investigated and discovered. Before the policeman even sent the body for identification, I told them it had to be my friend Will. They asked me how I was so sure, and I told them I wasn't sure myself. I was only able to piece it all together years later, after the reports came out. On the afternoon Will had agreed to come to my party. He made a decision after we parted ways. Instead of going home, he headed to the police station. He headed there to report years of daily essay against him by his stepfather, who warned him that if he ever told anyone, he would be dismembered and thrown into Stanville Creek. Unfortunately, his stepdad was driving home on a nearby road and spotted him walking in the opposite direction to their house. They got into a confrontation. The exact details are still murky, but all I know is that it resulted in Will being murdered by his stepdad. His stepdad was a tall, overweight man with long, sharp crooked teeth that stank of piss and rotten fish. He had one of his eyes surgically removed from a disease in his childhood, and wore a patch over the empty socket. As soon as he was arrested, he admitted everything, the almost daily rape of his stepson for over 5 years after the departure of his ex-wife, and the eventual murder. I blamed myself for a long time. Despite talking to Will every day, I realized how little I really knew about him. I never asked why he couldn't go to other people's houses or on school trips. I blamed myself for not recognizing the signs. Above all, the stories he used as a coping mechanism for the horrors he endured in real life. As he walked me home safely every day, he returned to face those horrors alone every night. And how blind I was to overlook that the first and most disturbing story he ever told me could never have been conjured up out of thin air. I moved to a new town after high school, and life was good. I have 2 kids of my own now, aged 7 and 10. My favorite thing to do is tell them stories as I walk them home from school. It reminds me of those middle school days I miss every so often, looking forward to a new story as I walked home with a real friend who had secrets I could never have guessed as he kept me company. Sometimes I'll tell my kids a scary story in honor of those times, something age appropriate of course, but still jarring enough to remind them to be vigilant about the very real evil that lurks in our world. And someday I'll tell them this story, but that'll have to wait a while. I've always been afraid of being attacked on the street at night. Despite years of working in a bar and coming home late around midnight, this fear had never left me. The pay was lousy and the boss forbade employees to park their cars in the parking lot reserved for customers. So every night, I had to walk alone for several minutes to my car parked a little further away. One day, as I was talking to one of my friends, she told me about this application. Don't you know this app? It's called Are You Being Followed, or AYBF for short. Basically, the app detects the waves of nearby cell phones, and if the algorithm notices that a signal is following you, the app sends you a notification, she explained. Some say it also detects ghosts and supernatural creatures that give off particular waves, but I think that's bullshit to attract views on TikTok, she added. I couldn't quite figure out how it worked, but she assured me that the algorithm was never wrong, and that it had already allowed her once to be alerted early enough to be safe from a strange guy one night. I downloaded it, figuring it couldn't hurt. One evening, as I was walking down the street clutching my coat, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was the app that had sent me a notification, and on the screen simply appeared the message, "You are being followed." I slowed down and looked around. The street was deserted, only the wind sounding in my ears. Perplexed, I continued walking, the sound of my solitary footsteps echoing around me. A minute later, I received another notification. "You are being followed." With no one behind me, I wondered if it was a bug or if this app was literally a scam. Boo! I jumped and shouted. And right in front of me was my colleague, Ian, bawling in laughter. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Here, you forgot your tips, and he handed me a few bills. Next time you do that, I'll empty my pepper spray in your face. Safe in my car, I finally managed to laugh it off, and figured that at least I had proof that the app worked. The app never triggered again after that. Until tonight. I just finished a long evening and was exhausted. All I wanted to do was go home and go to bed. As I was walking alone in the cold night, with just enough strength to look at the tips of my feet without falling asleep while walking, my cell phone vibrated and I picked it up, thinking someone had sent me a text message. "You are being followed." The appearance of the message caught me off guard and woke me up all at once. I looked around. There was nothing and no one around at this late hour, and the temperature was negative. I thought back to the only time it had gone off in Ian's joke. He knew perfectly well by now that I didn't find it funny, and I had made it clear that I hoped he wouldn't do it again or he would get his ass kicked. I stood there, looking back. looking for someone who obviously didn't exist. Still suspicious, I resumed my walk, keeping my phone in my hand. After a minute, it vibrated again. "You are being followed." I looked around again, but there was nothing. I was starting to panic. I was alone, in the middle of the night, and I was beginning to think something was wrong. A paper cup was pushed by the wind and the noise startled me. "Is anyone there?" I felt compelled to say aloud. Obviously, no one answered. "If there's anyone, I'm warning you, I'm armed," I lied, trying to be as convincing as possible. When nothing happened, I started to turn around to resume my walk. And at the last moment, out of the corner of my eye, even as I turned my head, I swore I saw something moving in the shadows at the corner of an alley. It took me a while to process what I'd seen. At first I thought it had been a cat. No, cats don't have white eyes. I walked quickly. "You are being followed." Behind me there was absolute silence. "You are being followed." Was it the sound of bare feet on the sidewalk I just heard? "You are being followed." I clutched my pepper spray can as I took the last few steps to my car while looking around like a madwoman attacked by imaginary birds. I closed the car door and locked the doors. Finally, I managed to exhale the air I'd been holding in my lungs. I didn't wait any longer, not wanting to linger here, and started the engine. Once home, I took a shower and got ready for bed. It had been a strange night. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered why the application had triggered so many times. Wasn't it possible that there had been a malfunction and I just imagined what I thought I was hearing and seeing because of the stress? After a while, I came to the conclusion that the app was bugged and that my overactive imagination combined with my natural fear of being attacked had done the rest. I put my mobile in my pocket and made several trips to the kitchen to throw away the remains of my dinner. My cell phone vibrated. "You are being followed." My breathing stopped. I stood there for several seconds, staring at my screen. I raised my head slowly and looked around. I inspected every nook and cranny accessible to my view without making a move. The light in my bedroom was still off. Apart from that, I couldn't see any place where an intruder might be. I made my way discreetly towards my bedroom. "Stop stressing, you said it yourself, this app doesn't work." I continued walking slowly, and put my hand on the light switch just to the left of the door. I pressed it. I took a few steps inside, but without a doubt, no intruder, ghost or monster had entered my room. As I returned to the living room, reassured, my gaze was drawn to the window and the night outside. And there I saw the pale face of a creature glued to the glass, staring back at me with the two whitest eyes I'd ever seen in my life. After a second spent trying to understand what I was seeing, I screamed in fear. The police immediately dispatched a patrol car after my panic call. The two officers inspected the area around the house without finding anyone who resembled the vague description I'd given them, even though they seemed worried. I had obviously avoided mentioning the fact that what I had seen had white eyes and skin and a bald head. After a while, they had to leave and told me to call back if I ever saw someone at my window again. I closed all my shutters and spent the night awake, a knife resting on the living room table. When day broke, I finally got the courage to leave my house. I looked around it and saw something the police hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to tell me. Just below the window where I'd seen this thing, there were dozens and dozens of bare footprints going from left to right towards all the other windows. I was a sheltered kid. Never had a lot of freedom, really. Hell, I wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom by myself until I was 8. It wasn't really my parents' fault, though. Before I was born, they had another kid, Jacob. They loved him a lot, even more than myself, I remember thinking as a kid. One day, I guess they weren't careful enough and Jacob ended up going missing. He was only 9 years old. He simply left, never to be seen again. They gave up looking for him after 7 months, and a year later they got pregnant with me. They never found his body, so I think a little part of them always hoped he was alive. I never met him, but I remember ever since I was little I had felt this weird connection to him. My parents used to tell me I'd scare the hell out of them when I was younger because I kept on talking to this one corner in the closet. Whenever they'd ask me who I was talking to, I would just say Big Brother. Keep in mind, I was younger than 3 when this had happened. They hadn't told me about him, and there's no way I could have known otherwise. I too remember he was a part of my life. Maybe it was some subconscious trauma response to having overprotective parents, but I could have sworn he was always there, hovering over me. The first time I remember him talking to me, I was around 5. I was coloring some picture in the playroom, and Jacob was talking to me. "What are you drawing?" he asked me. He tugged on my braids. I remember he did that a lot. "It's a forest with fairies and a rainbow and a baby deer," I said proudly, holding it up to him. He scoffed. "That don't even look like a real forest. To draw nature, you gotta be in nature. Here, come with me." He took my wrist in his cold, icy hand and practically dragged me outside. He handed me a little shovel I used to help Mom in the garden. "Dig right there," he told me, and I obliged. I found the usual: bugs, rocks, roots. But I also dug up something else, and Jacob smiled as I pulled it out of the ground. It was a backpack. I think it used to be red. It felt heavy and there was definitely something in it, but the zipper was so rusted I couldn't get it open. "That's all right." Jacob shrugged. "We'll get it later." "Lily." I heard my mother's panicked voice call. "Lily?" She saw me outside, and Jacob quickly took the bag from me and pushed me away. "Oh my goodness, don't run off like that alone." I wasn't alone, I protested, looking back to see nothing. Jacob has disappeared. My mom dragged me back inside by the collar of my dress and put me in my room. "Do not leave here. You mustn't go outside like that. Stay safe." I never really liked my bedroom. Something about it was just off, even to me as a little kid. I never felt entirely alone, and there was a certain amount of bad energy that I could just feel. I especially hated the closet. Whenever I would change clothes, I'd shut my eyes, fish around until I found something. I didn't care if it was ugly, I just wanted to get out of the closet as soon as I could. All of the energy that was in the room felt like it was smothering me in there. Suddenly, Jacob appeared behind me. I jumped. He looked where I had been staring, right at the closet. "You're scared of that thing, huh, little sis?" he asked, and I nodded shakily. He glanced at me, then back at the closet. "Sometimes, you need to face your fears." He very slowly paced towards the closet, then opened it in one swift movement. He motioned for me to come over. I, believing everything my big brother told me, inched towards him. "Go in." I shut my eyes and stepped in, and to my surprise he shut the door behind me, leaving me in the scary dark closet alone. I cried for him, but he didn't respond. I curled into a little ball and cried into my knees. The feeling of dread was overpowering me. I felt so alone. It was too quiet. Not a good, peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that you can feel in your bones. Like there was someone else in the closet with me, watching me. To comfort myself, I tapped on the closet walls. One section, I had noticed, sounded different than every other part of the wall, like it was hollow. I never liked that corner of the closet. It was the scariest part. Eventually, my mom called me down for dinner and I worked up the courage to get up and open the door. Jacob wasn't there. Nobody was. That night my parents told me to not speak about Jacob ever again. That stopped me for a while. I honestly don't remember a lot up until I was 8. I don't know if this was the first time I had spoken to him since the closet incident, but it's the most significant. This time, he took me to Dad's work computer and showed me all the fun games to play. But, after a while he told me to stop playing the silly games and start Googling things. Being a sheltered kid, I didn't even know what Google was. He told me to Google Jacob Holden. That's you, I remember saying. I clicked on the first article I found. Jacob Holden, aged 9, went missing from his Colorado home on March 12, 2003. He leaves without a trace, the only thing missing from his room being his school backpack. Authorities have tried to reach out to his parents, Jennifer and Carl Holden, to no avail. He was not seen leaving the house and was not seen by anybody after he left school. School backpack? I said. Like the one we found together? Without a word, he handed me the old rusted-off backpack. He then handed me a pair of scissors. Cut it open, Lily. Please. I obliged, and inside in the backpack I had found years ago was everything. Jacob Holden, passport. Jacob Holden, birth certificate. Anything that could have identified him was in that bag. But why was it buried in our backyard? I began thinking about everything. Mom and Dad almost never let me outside alone. The backpack was buried outside with everything in it. Mom and Dad apparently never talked to the police, even though they had told me they searched for months. Jacob was never seen leaving the house. The hollow wall in my closet. I guess Jacob had realized I had known what was up, because he presented me with something. A large sledgehammer. Go to your closet, Lily. You know what to do. With tears in my eyes, I took the sledgehammer from him and ran to my closet. I went, shaking, to the door that held my biggest fear for so long, now knowing that it was true the whole time. I found the hollow corner and let the sledgehammer loose on it. Something they don't tell you about dead bodies is, if they're trapped in an airtight space, such as a wall, they don't really decompose. They more just dry up, like meat in a dry aging fridge. Jacob's official cause of death was starvation. He was still alive when they put him in there. I didn't ever see Mom and Dad after that. Police took me to live with my aunt. I never saw Jacob either. I missed him. The last time I saw him, I was in the back of a police car, being taken to a foster home until they could find a relative who would take me in. I looked back at my house, my window, to see Jacob. He was staring at me, blankly. He waved goodbye at me, and I gave him a smile. Maybe he could never leave that place, but he sure made sure I could. He was one hell of a big brother, after all. I have always preferred living alone. No wife, no roommates, and most importantly, no kids. I wanted a cat or dog, but still hadn't gotten over the death of my last one. That all changed one day when I was taking an evening walk and, in a dark alleyway, I saw a crying child. I looked around hoping this wasn't some kind of trap and finally approached her. "Hey there, kiddo, what's the matter?" She stopped crying and looked up at me. I don't know what to do. I don't want to go home where they're all mean to me, but I'm scared and hungry. I offered to take her across the street to the gas station to get a sandwich, to which she stopped crying and silently joined my side, still sobbing and scared. After getting a sandwich that she enthusiastically devoured, I took her to the police station. She said her name was Lilith. She was 10 years old, and upon research the state had no records of her parents or past. They wanted to put her in an orphanage, but she clenched to my side. "No! I want to stay with him. He fed me, and he was nice to me." This poor girl acts like she never knew an act of kindness a day in her life. I didn't know how to take care of a child, but something akin to guilt came washing over me. The next day consisted of getting inspected and ultimately being deemed parent certified when they found out I had a good work-from-home job. Lilith, who I now call Lily, took to the house immediately. She liked looking in the fish tank of my aquarium. She was excited to have her own bedroom, and she loved running out in the yard. One thing about her I noticed is that this girl eats like there is no tomorrow. Oddly enough, she wasn't skin and bones when I met her, but she doesn't even have a trace of fat you would expect most kids her age to have. She looked like a mini adult. After eating 3 sandwiches and a bowl of ramen, she went to take a nap. I still haven't totally adjusted to having another living being other than fish and plants in the house, but she brought nice energy, and her always being hungry reminded me to eat something myself. I made a note to do something soon, otherwise she was going to bankrupt my grocery bill. I decided to take her out on a walk around the park area, hoping she would get tired and sleep easy tonight. To this day I regret doing this. On the walking path a deer walked in front of us. What is that? Have you not seen a deer before? Is it edible? Yes, actually, though I don't eat them. Lily then walked up even though I told her it might be dangerous. I then watched in horror as she transformed into something not human. A horizontal line formed on her stomach that opened to a large mouth filled with rows and rows of razor-sharp teeth. Black corvid-like wings protruded from her back, and a dark circle dripping some kind of black ooze formed over her head. A large tongue like the tentacle of a squid wrapped around the deer and pulled it in. Blood splattered, and bone crushed as she chowed on the deer like it was a candy bar. Then, like nothing happened, she turned back into her human form. That was delicious. I heard her say, having no reaction myself except trying not to faint from the gruesome horror I had witnessed. "We should go home, Dad. You don't look so good." From that point on I was afraid. Feeding her felt more like I was making an offering to a malevolent deity, and one night I woke up at 3 a.m. to which my blood ran cold when I saw her at the foot of my bed. "Dad, I'm hungry." I got up and made her 2 ham sandwiches. To avoid losing all my food in 3 days and keeping my bill down, I had to resort to more drastic measures. We would go on walks in the woods where we would go deer hunting, and I would let her eat her fill before returning home. On days when we couldn't find deer, I would take her to the rancher when I knew the farmer wasn't home and let her eat a whole cow. With the mess that got left behind, they always rule it up to an animal attack. The thing that got me the most is that when she's not acting like a voracious monster, she was the happiest little girl in the world. She loved having her hair brushed, making daisy chains, and I even bought a Switch so we could play Smash Brothers together. I really enjoyed having her around, maybe because I was too lonely before. One evening we went on a night walk in town, and we were stopped on the sidewalk. One man was in front of us with a crowbar. Well, look at that. He then had an accomplice with a switchblade behind us. "Make this easy on yourself, pal, and leave the girl." I was once again afraid, not just of the men but of something happening to Lily. I didn't notice when one of the men walked up to me and whacked my knee with a crowbar. "Dad." I heard Lily yell as blood rang through my ears and pain shot through my knee. He grabbed her by the arm, and she transformed. Wait the hell? I heard the man yell as she coiled her tongue around his leg and dragged him into her maw like he was livestock. His friend tried to run for it, but she devoured him as well. His screams must have lit up the silent night ambience, but I was in too much pain. My world was spinning, my hearing was muffled, and my vision was blurring. Finally, I came out of it long enough to pull the phone out of my pocket and call an ambulance. Sweetie, if the cops ask you what happened or anyone asks, I was hit by a speeding car. She nodded, and moments later the ambulance arrived to take me to the hospital. After getting a cast and some crutches, I was allowed to return home. I'm glad my job was work from home, so I didn't have to worry about a babysitter, and I was going to homeschool her when the season started. I told her never to transform in front of other people and to never eat another human being again. She agreed to all of it. One night I walked outside and saw her staring at the sky. Hey sweet pea, what are you looking at? What are those lights in the sky? Those are stars, sweetie. They look delicious. I hope one day I can go up there and eat every last star. I know you will one day, sweetie. I'm still terrified of her, and yeah, I know I live with a monster. But when you love someone, you look past the flaws. She gave me someone to work hard for, and I love her, and she loved me, I think, or at least I hope. Everyone says my hometown doesn't exist. I'm beginning to believe them. But that doesn't mean that was always the case. Let me back up. The first time I encountered this bizarre denial was after my first semester at college. I trekked to the Amtrak station, luggage in tow, and asked the attendant for one ticket to Casey Falls, Michigan, please. She looked up from her desk and blinked. Where? Casey Falls, Michigan, I repeated, a smidge slower this time. After she performed a search on her computer, then sought counsel from her manager, they determined that, if Casey Falls was a real place, it wasn't a stop on any of their lines. How can that be? I protested. I could see its train station as clearly in my mind's eye as their bewildered faces before me. Every spring break, I took the train with my family into Chicago, boarding at 7 o'clock in the morning at the platform just east of Berry Street. Dad would hand me $2 to buy a Coke and a bag of pretzels from the vending machines before the train arrived. My younger sister Janie and I sat impatiently on the benches waiting for our journey to begin. But relaying this memory to the exasperated attendants did little to correct their system, which omitted Casey Falls from its available destinations. I spent that Christmas alone in my dorm, desperately trying to get a hold of my family, but none of them answered. Mom, Dad, sister, phone, email, text, Facebook, nothing. Even stranger was that, overnight, their online presence vanished. Erased socials, bounced emails. When I called again, a recording informed me that the numbers I was trying to reach had been disconnected. What is going on? The following 2 weeks ordinarily spent opening presents, reconnecting with high school friends, ringing in the new year, were instead subsumed under my intense investigation. I scrubbed the internet for any mention of my hometown. I came up empty-handed. Despite endless hours scouring Google, Yahoo, even Bing, I found no mention of the central Michigan burg, ensconced in forest, home to Casey Falls Army Training Camp and the defunct, collapsed copper mines. Even Google Maps erased Casey Falls from its records. Where ordinarily I would see the cluster of homes and farms in Main Street, there was only a green swath of forest land. My hometown had literally been wiped off the map. Worse yet, it was beginning to disappear from my own memory. As break rolled on and my ceaseless search failed to yield a shred of evidence of my hometown's existence, I noticed my own recollection of it fading. While staring bleary-eyed at the television on New Year's Eve, watching revelers crowd Times Square to watch the Spangled Ball drop, I realized I couldn't remember any previous New Year's Eve. How had I spent them in Casey Falls? Maybe it was common to forget a few, for their memories to bleed into one another, to mix up which party went with which year, but to lose every New Year's Eve from one's personal history? I felt hollow, and in the void where Casey Falls and my preceding 18 years of memory should have been, something dark and sinister lurked. When my roommate returned in January and saw that I'd been holed up in our dorm for the entire break, he naturally inquired what happened. What happened indeed, was my mad response. Desperate for a memory of home, even if second-hand, I interrogated Sean. Surely you remember me talking about home at some point, right? I asked. And while he agreed that, surely, in our various 2 a.m. chats we must have touched on the subject, he was chagrined to admit nothing specific returned. The silver lining to this distressing chat was that I now had a partner. Sean, fascinated by my absent origin, took up the cause with me. He caught up quick, performing his own research online before arriving at the conclusion that we had to see for ourselves. So, on a weekend in late January, he drove us in his junky sedan into the heart of the Mitten, to where Casey Falls should have carved out a space for itself from the surrounding forest. To my horror, we found only trees. Where Main should have intersected with Blanchard, there was only a dirt drive reaching back into the woods. Sean didn't think his car would handle the uneven road too well, but after some pleading, he acquiesced. We drove slow along the forested road, tree branches squeezing us into a tunnel of foliage. Right here, I said. Casey Falls should be right here. I leapt out of the car and raced through the woods. I'm not sure why. I don't think it was rational, just my emotions taking control, a medley comprising anger, grief, confusion, fear, that propelled me through the underbrush until I tripped over something metal. I turned back to find a green box, like a geocache, resting on the forest floor. Inside, pages yellowed with age featured some sort of code scrawled across them, written with only half-decent penmanship. "What the hell is that?" asked Sean when he finally caught up to me. It was the question we tried pairing with an answer over the ensuing month. Neither of us were real codebreakers, so we shopped the pages around campus, taking it to math nerds and professors in the hopes one of them might crack it. One by one, they tried their best to decipher the documents, but each one met invariably with defeat. One professor called it the toughest code she'd ever encountered, while another suggested in all likelihood the pages were rubbish. But the fact that I'd found it where my hometown should have been kept me from accepting the latter explanation. Something was written in those pages, something that helped explain what happened to Casey Falls. But I'll never uncover its secrets. Because, on March 3rd, someone tore our dorm room apart and the only thing they took with them was the coded pages. Spooked by this flagrant invasion of privacy, Sean told me he would pursue the Casey Falls mystery no further. He believed that by showing the documents around campus, we'd attracted the attention of the feds, CIA, NSA, some other three-letter agency no one had ever heard of, and now we were being watched. "Whatever happened to your hometown," Sean said, "they don't want anyone to find out." The next week, Sean transferred out, enrolling in a school on the East Coast. He left without saying goodbye, another exit without ceremony. I've since taken a barista job to be able to stay in Chicago through the summer, since I've got nowhere else to go. While reckoning with the fact I've become an orphan, in every sense of the word, I can't help shaking the feeling that someone is watching me. Whatever happened to Casey Falls, it wasn't good. I can feel it in my bones, the unheard screams of family and neighbors vibrating in the marrow. I feel them, and it makes me sick, but I cling to the horror because it's all I have left of home. I'm sitting on my sofa. It's 9 p.m. and I don't know what to do. I worked until about 8 p.m. again today. It's not a very strenuous job, but it ends pretty late. It's pretty well paid, so I'm not complaining. What I find a pity is that I can't enjoy my two daughters, aged 4 and 6. When you become an adult, the reality of life hits you and you realize that you have to make sacrifices. I could have a normal job, of course, and come home at 6 p.m. and spend 2 more hours with my two little monsters. But the bills aren't going to pay themselves, and in the country I live in, life isn't exactly cheap. Today again, like every other day of the week, I got home around 8:30 p.m., and today again it was the same deal as usual. And today again, as I was getting out of the shower, I heard my wife and two daughters upstairs making a fuss. My daughter's bedroom is just above the living room, so it's not unusual for me to hear my daughters walking, laughing, or being scolded by Mom. When I come home, I'm careful not to make too much noise. The reason is simple. If my daughters know I'm home while my wife is trying to get them to sleep, they'll get excited and take even longer to sleep. My daughters are the happiest sweethearts in the world. They love to laugh and have fun, and we can't leave them alone in the evening before going to sleep, otherwise it would be a real mess upstairs. Hence, my wife usually stays with them for an hour or so, telling them stories, reading them books, or singing their favorite songs. If I were to show my face during this sacred ritual, everything my wife has built up would crumble, and neither I nor my wife wants our daughters to fall asleep at 11 p.m. or even midnight. That's why I usually stay downstairs in the living room, waiting for my daughters to go to sleep. I eat alone, tidy up any toys lying around, and do the dishes. The noises made by my wife and daughters are so familiar that I no longer pay attention to them, but I know they're there. Footsteps on the floor. I think the eldest is heading for the bathroom. A book dropped. I think the youngest did it. Mom grumbling. The two crazy little girls still won't go to sleep. Today again, my wife gives everything she's got to get our girls to sleep. But today is Friday, and tomorrow we're spending the day at Granny's. Saturday at Granny's is a kind of redemption for us. We forget all the tiredness of the week and have the best time ever. Even the cousins come. What I found strange was the time it took my daughters to fall asleep today. Probably the excitement of the fact that they'll be able to have fun all day at Grandma's tomorrow. I turned on the TV and kept the volume very low, and today again, the ritual was in full swing upstairs. I love my girls, but I started to feel a little annoyed by the situation. Oh, my phone's ringing. Another peculiarity of the ritual. My wife rings my phone twice to let me know that the girls are asleep and I can come upstairs. But today, 3 rings. 4 rings. 5 rings. I pick up the phone. Why won't you pick up? You always ring twice. What are you talking about? Never mind. Are they asleep? Can I come up? What do you mean? The girls were so overexcited today that we went to Grandma's around 7 p.m. We're going to be there all night, so I wanted to give you a heads up. I couldn't call earlier, you know your girls, they were glued to YouTube on my smartphone in the car. Today again, the ritual is happening upstairs, in my daughter's bedroom. But today, for the first time, I'm alone in the house. And I'm petrified. I am shaking as I write this. I've thought about calling the police, but I haven't figured out if I'm losing my mind or if my entire family has lost theirs. Maybe I will wake up soon and this will all have been a terrible nightmare. For context, I am an only child and the only grandchild of my last living grandmother. A couple weeks ago while at work, I received a phone call from my mother informing me that my grandmother had taken a fall in her kitchen. Mom said that my Uncle Lou was with her and already in the ambulance. Paramedics suspected she had a fractured hip and somehow sliced open her foot. She was sedated due to the pain but was otherwise responsive and fine. I immediately asked if I should meet them at the hospital, but Mom said, "No, no. Don't leave work, I'll update you once I know more." So, I waited. I love my grandmother, but she's probably the most stubborn woman I've ever met. She has her own remedy for just about anything and loathes seeing doctors, so I am sure she won't be fun to deal with while confined to a hospital bed. It doesn't help that Grandma absolutely refuses to use a walker or cane despite her debilitating age and will not leave her house to live in a nursing home. 6 months ago, Uncle Lou moved in with her to help out. Not that he's said it out loud, but I've always suspected that he did it more for the free rent. With nothing else to do, I sat at work, distracted, and waiting for a phone call from Mom with news. That call didn't come through until long after I'd gotten home and was brushing my teeth for bed. Apparently, Grandma was awake now and doing fine. She would need surgery for the broken hip, but they were able to get the laceration on her foot stitched up and bandaged. I asked to speak to her, so Mom held the phone up to Grandma's ear and I told her I loved her and would come see her once she was discharged. The hospital only allowed 2 visitors and Mom and Lou refused to leave her side. "Hi honey," Grandma said through the receiver. "I'm okay, but they won't let me leave." My mom's voice in the background exasperatedly explained that she needs surgery. "So they tell me," Grandma huffed. "I'm fine, Anna. Come see me when I get home and we can play cards." I smiled, promised to visit, and said goodbye. She was discharged the following week and sent home. The hip replacement was successful, but she developed a nasty infection on her foot. Between the 2 ailments, Grandma was confined to her bed. Once she was comfortable at home, Mom gave me the okay to come over, so I made some chicken dumpling soup and sat in the chair beside her bed while Mom spoon-fed it into Grandma's mouth. "There you go, Mom," my mother encouraged as Grandma sipped the broth off a spoon. I could tell Grandma was wildly out of it. I had been expecting an earful about having to use a bedpan, but due to the cocktail of narcotics and antibiotics, she merely grumbled in annoyance at Mom's and Lou's constant hovering. For what it was, she seemed in good spirits if not exceptionally tired. After about 2 hours and 2 small soup mishaps, I got up to leave. Mom saw me to the door. "She'll be fine, Anna," Mom reassured. "Lou and I are taking care of everything. Don't worry." I left feeling optimistic that my grandmother would be back to her Spitfire self relatively soon. But that visit with the soup was over 2 weeks ago now. Not long after, Mom took a leave of absence at work and holed up in Grandma's house with Uncle Lou. Each time I called, Mom gave a new excuse as to why I shouldn't visit: risk of infection, flu season, fatigue, bowel issues, you name it. At first, I accepted these excuses at face value. They seemed legit, but I can't even get Mom to put Grandma on the phone anymore. I made more soup yesterday and dropped it off, but Uncle Lou met me at the door and said it wasn't a good time, but he'd made sure she got it. "And we always let her know when you call," he assured. I noticed that there was an intense floral and yet antiseptic scent coming from the doorway. "Your mom won't stop cleaning," he explained. Frustrated, I called and complained to my father on my way home, but he defended Mom, like always. "She's always been like this," he reminded me. "They're extremely close, your mom and Grandma." "And Lou?" "Well, this just seems like classic Lou. You know, This is the first time they've really had to face the reality of their mother's age. They're just protective and scared to lose her. I figured he was right, and I hung up the phone feeling a little less unsettled. On Grandma's 89th birthday, however, I decided I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I would go over there and give her the present I purchased for her, a new thriller by her favorite author. I arrived at the house in late afternoon and noticed all the blinds were closed. Being that it was a warm spring day, it was common for Grandma to have all the windows open and drapes open, letting in both the sunlight and fresh air. I knocked twice on the front door, but no one came. I knocked again. No answer. I tried the knob, but the door was locked. I paused for a moment, considering that maybe no one was home. Maybe Grandma had a follow-up with her surgeon. But both cars were in the driveway, so I knocked again, louder. The door opened a crack and a foul odor filtered out, nearly choking me. "Mom!" I exclaimed, when her face appeared on the other side of the door. "What is that smell?" Seeing it was only me, she opened the door another inch. "The infection's gotten worse, but we're monitoring it." "Should I call an ambulance?" I asked in a panic, pulling my cell phone from my pocket. No, Anna," she quickly reassured me. "We have it handled." I stopped by and picked up refills of her antibiotics earlier, and we've been on the phone with her surgeon. Relieved, I took a deep breath, but the smell was so overpowering. "Mom, that smell is ungodly. Why don't you open the windows?" "We tried," she said. But she got so cold, Mom shrugged and didn't move. "Can I come in?" I asked, attempting to look over her shoulder into the dim house. I really didn't want to go inside due to the smell, but if Grandma wasn't doing well, I wanted to see her. "I don't think it's a good idea," she murmured. "Where's Uncle Lou?" I asked. "Upstairs in his room." Her voice was reassuring, but the smell turned my insides. Surely a smell like that could only mean bad things. I pushed the door open and Mom protested. "Just come back another day when she's feeling better. I promise you that Lou and I have this under control." In the kitchen, the odor was strong but mixed with the smell of bleach. I couldn't tell if that made it better or worse. "At least let me see her and give her a birthday present." Mom looked down to see the wrapped gift in my hands and sighed. "Of course," she said. "Gosh, I'm sorry. We've just been so preoccupied. I'm sure she'll love it." At that moment, Uncle Lou came trotting down the stairs and smiled at me. "Anna, Mom will be so happy you're here." I looked at my mother incredulously. She was staring at her feet now. What was going on? Uncle Luke continued down the hall, and I could hear him as he opened the door to Grandma's bedroom. "Mom, you have a visitor for your birthday." The smell of the house was searing my nostrils, but I wasn't going to let Grandma know I was repulsed by it. Mom led me down the hall to Grandma's bedroom, instructing me along the way to put on a brave face. I plastered a smile across my face as I turned the corner into the room. Grandma was sitting up in bed and Uncle Lou had taken a seat on the mattress beside her. His body obscured most of the view, but I could see her feet where they stuck out from under the quilt. The toes on her right foot were black with crumbling toenails and festering sores. The sheets under her heel were stained yellow from dried pus. Lou was prattling onto her, but Grandma didn't respond. "Isn't it nice for Anna to come see you on your birthday, Mom? Goodness knows you've been through a lot this month. She has a present for you." He turned expectantly to me, his profile moving just enough to reveal Grandma's form where she sat up against the pillows. I will try to explain the horror I witnessed, but I know words will never do it justice. My stomach flipped and I froze. Grandma's dull, lifeless eyes stared straight ahead at the wall, unblinking and glazed over. Her eyelids were crusty and her jaw widely agape with sagging lips, revealing a gray fuzz that had begun to coat her tongue. Uncle Lou patted her leg while Mom hastily pulled the quilt back down over her feet. I barely heard as Lou explained how cold she's been from the infection. He picked up a tissue from the box on the nightstand and began dabbing at the corner of her mouth. She doesn't talk much due to the heavy sedation she's under, he explained. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the pallid, gray skin of Grandma's face and how it was starting to sag in ways that had nothing to do with her age. Flies buzzed overhead and Mom picked up the fly swatter and began swatting wildly at them. "Goddamn flies," she mumbled. "They won't leave her alone." One of the flies circled Grandma's face and landed in her open maw. Uncle Lou merely shooed it away. "She's been sleeping sitting up like this for the past week or so," Mom explained, patting Grandma's now covered feet. "The pain is just too much for her to lay down. We tried, but her muscles spasm and she can't move." My knees were shaking and I could all but back out of the room, reaching for and pressing myself against the opposite wall. Vomit crept up the back of my throat. "It's okay, Anna," Uncle Lou said from inside the room. "I know it's hard to see her in such a state, but that's why your mom and I are here to take care of her. We agreed we wouldn't let her go back to that hospital. They've already messed up so much of her care. You saw her foot and what the doctors did to it. How a hospital could let gangrene go unnoticed is beyond me," Mom agreed. "We've been sponge bathing her regularly, airing her feet, and changing the bandages frequently." "It seems to be helping, right, Mom?" she asked, squeezing Grandma's ankle. I tried to put my head between my knees, but the smell was so overpowering. Mom stepped out in the hallway and touched my shoulder. I recoiled. "Oh, Hannah, I am sorry. This is why I didn't want you to come over. The gangrene smell is hard to tolerate, and I didn't want you to have to see her like this." Not knowing what else to do, I pulled her into the kitchen and said in my most steady voice, "Mom, why didn't you tell me Grandma had passed?" Mom's face didn't change. She just looked at me. "What are you talking about, Anna?" "She's right there. You saw her." "Yes, I did see her," I agreed, pointing at the bedroom down the hall where the smell was so strong that I was close to passing out. "But Grandma is dead, Mom. You know that, right? She has very obviously passed away." Mom's eyebrows narrowed and she pursed her lips. "Listen, Anna. I get that this is hard for you. Hell, it's hard for all of us. But if you're saying this just to hurt me, it's not going to work. Stop being a brat. Your father is on his way over with a birthday cake." The room began to spin and I needed to get out of that house immediately. I tossed the present on the kitchen table and grabbed my bag, fleeing out the kitchen door and into my car where I took deep gulps of fresh air. I could see Mom at the large bay window, looking out at me. She looked angry and upset, but quickly turned and walked away. I pounded the steering wheel, yelling obscenities. Other than an open casket funeral, I had never seen a dead body before, let alone one that had clearly been dead for weeks. But Grandma was undoubtedly dead, and my mother and uncle were staying in that house with her corpse, washing it, feeding it, and talking to it like nothing had changed. I threw open the car door and vomited all over Grandma's neglected shrubs. By the time the dry heaves kicked in, Dad's car pulled in the driveway. "Hey, sweetheart," he said as he opened his car door, seeing me kneeling in the grass. "Are you all right? Your mom called and told me you were quite upset." "Dad. She's dead." I choked out, pointing at the house. Who's dead? He asked, his voice worried. Grandma. I shouted. Grandma is dead. Mom and Lou, they're just sitting in there with her body. Anna, calm down. Your mom mentioned you were in hysterics and talking nonsense. Talking nonsense? What are you saying? I choked out. Go look, Dad. I swear. You'll see. She's dead and Mom and Lou have lost their minds. All right, he said, holding up his arms in surrender. Let me grab the cake and I'll go inside and see what's going on. Just stay here, okay? I collapsed back in the front seat of my car, blasting the AC in an attempt to flush the smell of rotten flesh out of my nose. It felt like an hour before the front door opened again and Dad calmly walked over to my driver's side window. Hi, Anna Bear, he said cautiously. Did you see her, Dad? You saw her, right? Shoo, Anna, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Calm down. Yes, I saw her and she's very sick but otherwise alive. Your mom and Lou are taking good care of her. What? I nearly screamed. Come inside, Dad said, going for the door handle. I quickly locked the car. Dad threw up his hands in frustration. Just come inside, Anna. Uncle Lou is getting Grandma into her wheelchair and we're all going to have some cake. He glanced up at the front window of the house. Ah, see? There she is. I glanced up to see my grandmother's face at the window, her dead eyes looking blankly out over the front yard. Rigor mortis had made it so her body couldn't sit in the wheelchair just right. Even from a distance and through a pane of glass, I could see death in her eyes and the shocking gape of her mouth. I gagged. Her face looked even more twisted now, as if she'd taken her last breath in a tremendous amount of pain. But what made me scream in abject terror was that her cloudy pupils seemed to turn ever so slightly toward me. I threw the car into drive and sped out of the driveway, ignoring the shouts of my father and Uncle Lou bursting out the front door. I didn't dare go home where I was sure my father would follow. Were they right? Was she actually alive? It's not like I checked for a pulse or air in her lungs before I took off. I didn't touch her at all. Could it be me then? Was I the one having a nervous breakdown? I don't know what to do now. I'm absolutely terrified. Worst of all, when I close my eyes, all I see is my grandmother's rotting face. I'm 15 and I was home alone one night with my sister, who's 7. Our parents were out at some wedding and they'd left us home. Honestly, I like that. Who doesn't like having the house to themselves? My sister was little enough to not bother me that much. So I had the job of watching her, making sure she ate, took her meds, went to sleep at a reasonable hour. Except, well, I didn't really care about putting her to sleep. I'd promised her that she could stay up as late as she wanted. She's a kid, it's a Saturday night, it's not the end of the world, plus she'll probably only resist up until 1 a.m. and then fall asleep on the couch or something. Mom and Dad left around 7. Remember, no staying up late, equal we left you on the counter. There's some macaroni. If you want more, there's more in the fridge, said Dad. Leah, if you want to eat yogurt, take it out of the fridge and leave it out for a bit to warm up. Don't eat it cold. You'll get a sore throat dash. Yeah, Mom, I know, I replied. If Dina wants to, you can give her some Pepsi, but please don't let her exaggerate with it. She'll never fall asleep. Okay. Make sure the windows are closed, maybe leave the bathroom one open. All right, I know. Okay. Love you. Bye. As soon as they left, I turned to Dina and said, well, what do you want to do? She was pretty excited that we were alone. The first thing she wanted to do was watch TV in the big bedroom and eat popcorn. Mom would have commented on the smell, but Mom wasn't home. After, we played some video games on my older brother's console, who'd left it here after he moved out. He didn't have many, so we played Need for Speed for a while and kept crashing into walls and trees and each other because of how bad we were at this. We ate dinner, then some ice cream. I tried to make a milkshake, but it didn't really taste that good, and I ended up having to spend ages to clean the blender. I left her upstairs and watched some YouTube in the living room, then went up to my parents' bedroom and started looking through my mom's closet. I found some bags she literally never wore, and I stole it. I was trying out some clothes when Dina came into the room. What are you doing? Just looking at stuff. Mom's? Does it fit you? Well, not everything. But some things work. Do you like fashion? She asked, throwing herself on the bed. Yeah. She has some pretty cool stuff. Vintage. I picked up one of her scarves. Just don't go around saying I'm going through her stuff when I'm alone. Why? Doesn't she let you do that? She doesn't mind, but still. Okay. It was around midnight. It's getting pretty late. Aren't you tired? No, not really, she responded, her eyes glimmering. After a bit, she tilted her head and, watching me fold back Mom's clothes, asked me something that seemed pretty ordinary. Do you think he knows we're awake? Who, Dad? I mean, he told us not to stay up late, especially you, but I think he knows we weren't gonna listen. He doesn't mind, though, don't worry. She paused, again. I closed the closet door. Not Dad. I stopped. Then who? She didn't answer. I turned to face her. Who were you talking about? Dina seemed to hesitate. I had watched too many movies about kids saying freaky things, and I remember thinking, I swear to God, if she says some weird shit like the Hat Man or the man in the hallway, I'm packing our bags and getting the fuck out. I was already starting to feel uneasy, and I didn't need her building into that fear. I don't know. What do you mean? Who knows we're awake? I saw him at the window. When we were eating. My blood ran cold. Who did you see? What the fuck? Hey, don't say that. Who did you see? I don't know. She started playing with her sleeves. Someone was out there. I saw their face in the glass. They were pretty close to the window, and they seemed to watch us. Why didn't you say anything, Dina? I didn't think it was a big deal. Was it a he? I think, yeah. He looked very tired. And he had no brows. I was literally paralyzed. Okay, we're going downstairs, and you're gonna show me where you saw this thing. Oh, I didn't see him downstairs. What do you even mean? You said he was watching us eat. Yeah, eat popcorn. Upstairs. Eat popcorn. In our parents' bedroom. Upstairs. Dina wouldn't make this up. She wasn't like that. My eyes darted to the window. No one was there. You know how, during the night, all you see out the window is darkness? How you're afraid, how you have this irrational fear that you might see someone else. Or something else, staring back? Well, that's what was playing in my head at that time. I started asking her more about this man, this thing. I don't know. I mean, I only see him sometimes. He just watches and doesn't say anything, but I know he comes in when we sleep. Are you making this up? I'm not. I sometimes fall asleep to him staring at me, and when I wake up, he's gone, but the window is open, or the things in my room are different. Sometimes I catch him off guard and wake up in the middle of the night, and he crawls out of the room, through the window, quickly. It's funny. He comes in, and you let that happen? I don't mind him. I think he's just curious. Maybe he wants what us humans have. He's like Ariel. Oh, shut up. You're seriously comparing this thing to the Little Mermaid? What the fuck, Dina? She was starting to feel uncomfortable. She hadn't probably expected me to get so angry. Then, she smiled. What? I'm just joking. What? I made that up, she laughed. To scare you. I raised my brows. Scare me? Why? I don't know. I mean, the whole thing seemed ridiculous. A ridiculous story. So it was logical that she'd made it up. I was still a bit freaked out. That wasn't funny. I seriously got freaked out, Dina. I'm gonna check if I locked the doors and windows. Just don't let him catch you, she said. What a devious child. And I was gonna let her stay up as long as she wanted. After I checked, I put her off to sleep. I decided to watch something in my bedroom, but made sure to leave the lights on in the hallways, and the porch light. I was starting to wish my mom and dad would come home sooner. After a while, when it was about 2 a.m., a thought occurred. I don't know why. I stood up and slowly creeped up to her room. I was about to open the door, when something made me look through the keyhole first. I saw it. It was exactly as she described it, and it was inside. Some weird, horrific skin crawler freak. I don't even know how to describe it, but I froze and it all felt like a dream. Its limbs were long and its face was smooth, like a plastic mask. The eyes moved around a lot. Dina was sleeping, unaware of this thing. This creature. It turned its back to me, facing Dina. My mind was desperately looking for something to do. Go inside? Face it? I didn't know what it wanted, or if it would let me be. Call the police. That meant leaving Dina alone in the room with it. I couldn't do that either. Suddenly, it crawled on the wall. At least, I assumed it was the wall, because it had disappeared out of my range. I stopped breathing. I think even my pulse stopped. Then, I saw its eye through the keyhole, staring back at me. That took me off guard, and I jumped back and screamed. I was expecting it to break through the door, but nothing happened. Was it still looking at me through the keyhole? To even be acknowledged by that thing horrified me. My head was spinning. I could not move. I just prayed it would go away, and I didn't understand why everything was so silent. After a while, I built up some courage and opened the door. The room was empty. The thing had left, but so had Dina. Dina. Dina, please, Dina. I knew my screaming was in vain. For a few moments that felt like hours, I could not understand what was happening to me. My desperate mind found one demented solution. I picked up my phone, my hand shaking so bad, and called my mom. She answered, but I couldn't hear anything due to the loud music. After a few moments, she went outside, and I could distinguish her voice. I was staring at the empty window, my mouth dry, my eyes stinging from tears. "Yeah. What's up, Leah? Are you okay? Did anything happen? You scared me." I took a deep breath. "Hey, Mom, don't get mad, but I had a friend over, Jen, and she said she's home alone too and asked us if we wanted to come have a sleepover with her. So we're at hers now." There was a pause. "What?" "Leah, it's 2 in the morning. Dina isn't sleeping?" "Oh, no, she's asleep. We've actually been here for a while, since, I don't know, 11 p.m. or something, but I kind of put off telling you." "Don't get mad. We're gonna come back home in the morning." I heard her sigh. "I don't like it when you do these things. You should have asked me first. We'll talk in the morning." "Right. I know. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Bye." I hung up, then made my way to the open window and stared out. I saw some broken branches and my tired mind made out a trail. I sat up on the windowsill, then stepped out on the tree, numb. I'm going after her. Wherever it took her, I'm going. I've always loved kids and thought babysitting would be an easy way to earn some extra money while studying for my degree. When Mrs. Thompson called me out of the blue and asked if I could watch her 2 children, Lily and Max, for a few hours one evening, I didn't hesitate to say yes. She offered an incredible hourly rate and assured me that the kids were well behaved. The job seemed like a dream come true. The evening started off normally enough. I arrived at the Thompsons' home, a large, old house on the outskirts of town, and was greeted by Mrs. Thompson, a pleasant woman in her mid-40s. She introduced me to Lily, a sweet 5-year-old with curly blonde hair, and Max, a quiet 7-year-old who seemed a bit shy. After a brief tour of the house, Mrs. Thompson handed me a list of rules and instructions. She looked at me with an intensity that made me uneasy. "These rules are very important, Hannah," she said. "Please follow them exactly." I nodded, taking the list from her. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. I will." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you. We'll be back around midnight." With that, she and Mr. Thompson left, and I was alone with the kids. I glanced at the list of rules, feeling a little silly. How hard could it be to babysit for a few hours? 1. Always keep the doors and windows locked. No problem. It was an old house, and I figured they just wanted to be safe. 2. Do not let the children play outside after dark. Fair enough. It was already evening, and the yard was surrounded by dense woods. 3. Do not answer the phone unless it rings twice in quick succession. A bit odd, but okay. 4. Bedtime is at 8 p.m. No exceptions. That seemed reasonable. 5. If you hear whispering, ignore it. Do not investigate. That one made me pause. What kind of whispering? But I shrugged it off as overprotective parenting. 6. If Lily starts singing, do not interrupt her. Wait until she finishes. Lily was humming to herself as she played with her dolls. It seemed harmless enough. 7. If Max asks you about the shadows, distract him immediately. Creepy, but probably just a way to keep his overactive imagination in check. 8. Under no circumstances should you go into the basement. That was fine with me. I hated basements. I put the list aside and joined the kids in the living room. They were watching a cartoon, and everything seemed perfectly normal. After a while, I made them dinner and helped them get ready for bed. As the clock struck 8, I tucked them in, read them a story, and turned off the lights. "Good night, Hannah," Lily whispered, her voice soft and sweet. "Good night, Lily." "Good night, Max," I replied, closing the door gently behind me. I went back downstairs and settled onto the couch with a book. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Around 9 o'clock, the phone rang once, then twice in quick succession. Remembering the rule, I picked it up. "Hello? Hannah, it's Mrs. Thompson. How are things going?" "Everything's fine," I replied, glancing around the room. "The kids are asleep, and everything's quiet." "Good," she said, sounding relieved. "Remember to follow the rules, and everything will be fine." "Of course," I said, trying to sound confident. After we hung up, I went back to my book, but my mind kept drifting to the list of rules. What did they mean by whispering? And why couldn't Max talk about shadows? Suddenly, I heard a faint sound coming from upstairs. It was like a soft, rhythmic chanting. My heart skipped a beat as I realized it was Lily singing. Remembering the rule, I stayed where I was, listening to her song. It was a haunting melody, and it sent chills down my spine. She sang for what felt like an eternity before finally falling silent. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. This was ridiculous. It was just a song. But the house felt different now, like the air was thicker, heavier. A few minutes later, I heard another sound, this time from the hallway. It was a soft, whispering noise, just barely audible. I strained to hear what it was saying, but I couldn't make out any words. My first instinct was to get up and check on the kids, but the rule echoed in my mind: if you hear whispering, ignore it. I stayed on the couch, my heart pounding. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It felt like it was coming from right behind me, but I forced myself to stay put. After a few agonizing minutes, it stopped. The house was silent again, but the sense of unease lingered. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps, coming down one step at a time. I turned toward the sound, my breath catching in my throat. Max appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes wide and frightened. "Hannah," he whispered, "the shadows are moving." I remembered the rule and quickly stood up. "Hey, Max, do you want some hot chocolate? Let's go to the kitchen." He nodded, his eyes darting around the room as if he was afraid something might jump out at him. I took his hand and led him to the kitchen, trying to keep my voice light and cheerful. "Do you like marshmallows in your hot chocolate?" I asked, hoping to distract him. He nodded again, but his grip on my hand tightened. I made us both a cup of hot chocolate, and we sat at the kitchen table. Max kept glancing over his shoulder, his fear palpable. "Max, what did you see?" I asked gently, trying to keep my own fear at bay. "The shadows," he whispered. "They're watching us." A shiver ran down my spine. "It's okay, Max. You're safe here." He shook his head. "They're everywhere. They want to take us." I didn't know what to say. I tried to reassure him, but his fear was contagious. I decided it was best to put him back to bed and hoped he would fall asleep quickly. As we walked back up the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I tucked Max back into bed and stayed with him until his eyes finally closed. As I turned to leave the room, I caught a glimpse of movement in the hallway. My heart leaped into my throat, but when I looked again, there was nothing there. Back in the living room, I paced nervously, my mind racing. This job was turning out to be far more than I had bargained for. The rules, the whispering, the shadows, it all felt like something out of a nightmare. At around 11:30, the phone rang again, twice in quick succession. I answered it with a trembling hand. "Hannah, it's Mrs. Thompson. Is everything okay?" I'm not sure," I admitted. "Max was talking about shadows, and there's been strange noises." "Just follow the rules, Hannah," she said firmly. "We'll be home soon." She hung up before I could say anything else. I set the phone down, my hand shaking. What was going on in this house? A sudden noise from the basement made me jump. It was a soft, rhythmic thumping, like someone knocking on a door. The rule about the basement flashed through my mind. Under no circumstances should you go into the basement. I wanted to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard anything, but the sound was persistent. I took a deep breath, trying to muster my courage. Maybe it was just a loose pipe or an old furnace acting up. As I stood there, debating what to do, the knocking grew louder, more insistent. Against my better judgment, I found myself moving toward the basement door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Just as I was about to turn it, a voice behind me made me freeze. "Hannah, don't." I spun around to see Max standing at the top of the stairs, his eyes wide with fear. "Go back to bed, Max," I said, my voice shaking. "Please, don't open the door," he whispered. "They'll get out." My heart pounded in my chest. "Who will get out?" "The shadows," he said, his voice barely audible. "They're trapped down there. If you open the door, they'll come for us." The fear in his voice convinced me to step back. I guided Max back to his room and tucked him in once more, promising him that I wouldn't open the basement door. Back in the living room, I sat on the couch, my mind racing. The knocking continued, but I forced myself to ignore it. Whatever was down there, I didn't want to find out. Finally, just before midnight, the front door opened and Mrs. Thompson walked in, followed by her husband. Relief washed over me at the sight of them. "How was everything?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room. "It was eventful," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, as if she expected that answer. "Thank you, Hannah. You did well." I gathered my things and headed for the door, eager to leave the house and its unsettling secrets behind. As I stepped outside, Mrs. Thompson's voice stopped me. "One last thing, Hannah." I turned to look at her. "Yes." "Never speak of what happened here tonight. For your own sake." I nodded, too shaken to argue, and left the house. The drive home was a blur. My mind was filled with thoughts of shadows, whispers, and the rules I had barely understood. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. The darkness in my room seemed thicker, more oppressive. I kept the lights on, unable to sleep, haunted by the events of the evening. The next morning, I woke up with deep, dark circles under my eyes, despite barely sleeping. As I dragged myself to the bathroom, I noticed something odd in the mirror. There were faint, shadowy figures flickering behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a remnant of the night's terror. Over the following days, the occurrences escalated. I would see fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye, hear whispering voices when I was alone, and feel a chilling presence in my room at night. My grades started to slip, and I found it hard to concentrate on anything. Friends noticed the change in me, commenting on how tired and distracted I seemed. One night, as I was studying for an important exam, the power went out. I sat in the dark, trying to steady my breathing, when I heard the familiar whispering. It was louder now, almost as if it was inside my head. I clutched my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't stop. Suddenly, a cold hand grabbed my ankle, pulling me off my chair. I screamed and kicked, but there was nothing to fight against. The whispers turned into menacing growls, and the shadowy figures closed in around me. Just as quickly as it started, the power came back on, and the shadows vanished. But the fear remained, a constant reminder that I was never truly alone. I knew then that the shadows had followed me home, and they were here to stay. No matter where I went, I could feel their presence lurking in the corners, watching and waiting. The babysitting job that seemed like a dream had turned into a never-ending nightmare. Desperate for a solution, I contacted Mrs. Thompson, hoping she could help me banish the shadows. She listened to my plight with a knowing expression and then reluctantly gave me a small, worn book titled Wardings Against the Dark. She explained that it contained rituals and protections that might help me rid myself of the shadows. I spent the next few nights carefully following the instructions in the book. I lit candles, burned herbs, and recited incantations. Each night, the presence of the shadows seemed to weaken. On the third night, after completing the final ritual, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief as the shadows dissipated, leaving my room feeling lighter and more peaceful. Although the immediate threat was gone, the experience had left a permanent mark on me. I no longer took safety for granted and always followed the rules Mrs. Thompson had given me, even in my own home. I never took another babysitting job, and the memory of that night stayed with me, a constant reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The true horror had just begun, and it was far from over. But at least, for now, I had found a way to keep the darkness at bay.